There was a moment when the choice was still his to make. He stood at the induction center in Houston, April 28, 1967. The room was institutional. White walls, fluorescent lights, men in uniform at metal desks, forms on clipboards, the low hum of bureaucratic machinery. Outside, the morning was bright. Inside, everything was waiting. When they called his name, Cassius Marcellus Clay, Jr., he didn't step forward. He'd already left that name behind. He was Muhammad Ali now, the greatest heavyweight champion in the world, and Muhammad Ali wasn't going. The officer called again, louder this time. The room shifted. Other men, other inductees glanced over. Some knew who he was. The cameras outside had made that clear. Some didn't. It didn't matter. The procedure was the same for everyone. The officer called a third time, as protocol required. Military procedure allowed for 3 calls. After that, refusal became official, became documented, became criminal. Ali stood still. He said no, quietly, completely. Not loud, not defiant, just clear. His hands were at his sides, his breathing was steady. He'd fought in front of millions. He'd stood across from Sonny Liston when Liston was supposed to kill him. This room was smaller, quieter, but the weight was different. In the ring, the consequences lasted 15 rounds. Here, they lasted years. The room understood before anyone spoke again. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't hesitation. This was refusal. The officer wrote something down. Another man in uniform stepped forward. They explained what refusing induction meant. 5 years in federal prison, $10,000, loss of passport, criminal record. They asked if he understood. He said yes. They asked if he wanted to reconsider. He said no. Outside, reporters were pressed against the building, cameras ready. The government was waiting. The boxing commission was waiting. The sponsors, the fans, the people who'd paid to see him fight. Everyone was waiting to see what saying no would cost him. He was 25 years old, the heavyweight champion of the world. He'd beaten Sonny Liston in 1964 when everyone said he couldn't. He'd defended the title 9 times. He told the world he was the greatest, and no one could prove him wrong. The title meant everything in boxing. It meant legitimacy. It meant power. It meant money. It meant he'd earned the right to speak. But that was before the draft notice, before the war pulled at him, before the choice became unavoidable. He'd converted to Islam in 1964, changed his name, said Cassius Clay was a slave name. The press kept using it anyway. He corrected them every time. Some listened, most didn't. By 1966, he was openly opposing the Vietnam War. "I ain't got no quarrel with them Viet Cong," he'd said to a reporter. The words made headlines. Editorial pages called him unpatriotic. Fans turned. Some burned his posters. Politicians called for consequences. Now the consequences were here. In early 1966, Ali had been classified 1Y by his draft board, unfit for service due to low scores on mental aptitude tests. He wasn't being called. Then the war expanded. The military lowered its standards. In February 1966, he was reclassified 1A, eligible for the draft. He applied for conscientious objector status. He said his religion forbade him from fighting in a war. He said the Quran was clear. He wasn't a pacifist. He made his living in violence, controlled violence, sanctioned violence. But war was different. Killing for a government was different. He was a minister in the Nation of Islam. He had a duty to his faith. The draft board rejected his application. They said his beliefs weren't sincere enough. They said professional boxers couldn't claim non-violence. The decision came in March 1967, 1 month before the induction notice. So when they called his name in Houston, he already knew what he was doing. He'd thought about it. He'd prayed about it. His lawyers had explained the consequences. His managers had warned him. Everyone close to him understood what refusal meant. He did it anyway. The trial came fast. Federal court in Houston, June 1967. The jury was all white. 12 men who'd never met him, who'd seen him only on television or in newspapers, who knew him as the loud fighter who'd changed his name and said he wouldn't fight for his country. The prosecution argued he'd violated the law. The Selective Service Act was clear. Refusing induction was a crime. Simple, direct. No exceptions for religion when the draft board had already ruled. The defense argued his religious beliefs were genuine, that he qualified for conscientious objector status, that the draft board's denial was arbitrary. The courtroom was full, reporters in the back rows, spectators craning to see. This wasn't just a draft case. This was Muhammad Ali. The government wanted him made an example of. The defense wanted vindication. The jury deliberated for 20 minutes. 20 minutes to decide 3 years of appeals, 20 minutes to strip a title, 20 minutes to end a career, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him immediately. 5 years in federal prison, $10,000. Ali's lawyers filed an appeal before they left the courthouse. The appeals process would take years. He wouldn't serve time. Not yet. But the sentence that mattered didn't come from the judge. It came 8 days later. The New York State Athletic Commission held an emergency meeting. They voted to suspend Ali's boxing license, immediately, indefinitely. The commission's chairman said Ali had disgraced boxing, that his actions were detrimental to the sport, that he was no longer fit to hold a license. Then the other states followed, one by one. Commission by commission, Pennsylvania, California, Illinois, Nevada, every state with a boxing authority. They all stripped his license. The World Boxing Association held a vote. They stripped his title. The man who'd beaten Sonny Liston, who'd defended the belt 9 times, who'd told the world he was the greatest. The title was gone. He was still 25 years old. For 3 years, he didn't fight. Couldn't fight. The law said he was free pending appeal, but the boxing world had already made its decision. There was no ring for him. No promoter would risk it. No state would sanction it. No venue would host it. Other men held his title. Joe Frazier, George Foreman. The names that should have been his opponents became champions without facing him. The matchups that should have defined his career, Ali versus Frazier at their absolute peaks, both undefeated, both perfect, never happened. Not when it mattered. Every month that passed was a month his body aged. A month his reflexes slowed by fractions he couldn't measure but would eventually feel. Fighters don't stay sharp without fighting. The timing goes first, then the legs, then the instinct that separates champions from everyone else. He watched other fighters on television, saw them take fights that should have been his, saw them hold the belt he'd earned, saw the years pass like water through his hands. He wasn't silent. He couldn't be. He needed money. He spoke at colleges for fees, at rallies, at mosques, anywhere they'd pay him to show up. He became something unexpected. Not just a fighter, but a voice, a symbol. The government wanted him quiet and forgotten. Instead, he became louder, but speaking fees didn't pay what boxing did. A single title defense would have earned more than a year of lectures. His income collapsed. He sold his house in Miami. Endorsements vanished. The commercials stopped calling. The man who'd filled Madison Square Garden, who'd drawn crowds in every city, couldn't get a boxing license in a single state. The years passed slowly. 1967, 1968, 1969. Each year further from his prime. Each year the comeback became harder. Athletes have windows. Short windows. His was closing while lawyers argued in courtrooms. His lawyers kept filing motions. Appeals moved through the courts, briefs, arguments, hearings. The government kept arguing he was a draft dodger, a criminal, a man trying to use religion as a shield. Ali kept saying he was a believer, that his faith was real, that he'd rather go to prison than violate it. In 1970, a shift came. Not legal, not official, but real. The war in Vietnam was dragging. Public opinion was turning. Ali's stance looked different than it had in 1967, less like cowardice, more like principle. A federal court in Atlanta allowed him to fight again, not because they agreed with him, but because the ban seemed punitive, seemed like punishment before conviction was final. He fought Jerry Quarry in October 1970. In Atlanta, he won in 3 rounds. It wasn't close, but he wasn't the same either. 3.5 years out of the ring, 3.5 years older. The speed was still there. The reflexes still worked, but something was different, harder to see, harder to name. The legs felt heavier, the breath came shorter. The distance he used to control effortlessly now required thought. Small adjustments, compensations. Things that used to be instinct now required decision. He fought Oscar Bonavena in December, won in 15 rounds. Then the fight everyone wanted happened, Ali versus Joe Frazier. March 1971, Madison Square Garden. Both men undefeated. The title on the line, the fight they should have had in 1968 or 1969, when both were perfect, when both were untouched. By 1971, both men had aged. Both men had changed. The fight happened 3 years too late, and the delay cost Ali more than it cost Frazier. Frazier had been fighting, training, sharpening. Ali had been speaking. Waiting, arguing in courts, Frazier won. 15 rounds, decision, Ali's first loss. 2 months later, the Supreme Court ruled, June 28, 1971. 8 justices, 0 dissents. They overturned his conviction. The draft board's reasons for denying conscientious objector status contradicted each other. The conviction couldn't stand. The government's case had been flawed from the beginning. He'd been right all along, legally, procedurally, morally. But by then the cost was already paid, 25 to 28, a boxer's prime. The speed that made him impossible to hit. The reflexes that let him see punches coming before they were thrown. The sharpness, the timing, the distance control that separated great fighters from legendary ones. Those years don't wait. The body doesn't pause. The skills don't stay frozen. He kept fighting. He beat Joe Frazier in a rematch in 1974. He stunned the world by knocking out George Foreman in Zaire later that year. The rumble in the jungle. He reclaimed the title at 32. He became more famous than he'd ever been, more respected, more beloved. But the fights that should have happened in 1967, 1968, 1969, they didn't happen. The version of Ali that existed before the ban, the one that floated like a butterfly and stung like a bee, the one that moved faster than anyone his size should have been able to move, that version lost 3 years. He never asked for them back. He never said he regretted the choice. When reporters asked if it was worth it, he'd say yes. He'd say his faith mattered more than boxing. He'd say he'd been right to refuse. And he had been right. The Supreme Court confirmed it. History vindicated him. Decades later, the same people who'd called him a coward would call him a hero. The same government that prosecuted him would honor him. But vindication doesn't return what was taken. The years were gone. The fights were gone. The prime was gone. The title he would have defended 10, 15, 20 times, those defenses never happened. 27-year-old Ali doesn't exist. 26-year-old Ali doesn't exist. The version of him that should have been undefeated through 1970, the one that should have entered the Frazier fight with 40 wins and 0 losses, that fighter never existed. The ban erased him before he could become real. Other fighters got to age naturally, got to lose reflexes gradually, got to slow down fight by fight, learning to compensate as their bodies changed. Ali lost 3 years in one motion. He came back older, came back different, came back against opponents who'd been training, fighting, improving, while he watched from the outside. The choice had been his. The refusal was his. The consequence was paid in currency that couldn't be recovered. The courthouse where they convicted him still stands. The induction center where he said no is still there. The rings where he should have fought in 1968 hosted other men instead. He lived to 74, long enough to see the world change its mind about him, long enough to light the Olympic torch in Atlanta, long enough to receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom from the same government that prosecuted him, long enough to become a symbol instead of just a fighter. But he never got the years back, never got the fights back, never got to see what the uninterrupted version of himself would have become. No one gave him back the time,